Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation. In my presentation, I will talk also about continuous variable quantum key distribution. I will be talking about two different protocols, one based on coherent states and one based on squeeze states. This work has been carried out in my group at the Technical University of Denmark, Department of Physics. So here's a list of my group members, but the work was performed by those three guys mentioned on top, Christian, Tobias, and Ulrik. And our work on QKD is performed in collaboration with a number of people, in particular Stefano, who's the chairman here, and Sam Brownstein, and also Carlo, who gave the talk to us before mine, Christoph Marquardt and Gerd from Erlangen, as well as Christian Riedel from Toronto, and Vladislav Usenko and Radim Philippe from Olomouc. Alright, so let's get started. So what it's all about quantum key distribution. So the BB84 protocol is now more than 3 decades old, and it's a way to generate a secret key between two parties, Andersen by which you can realize different primitives, such as secure communication. And of course this has been refined over the years, and today we see commercialization as well as field implementation of this BB84 protocol and related protocols. However, all these protocols are based on discrete variables. I mean, sometimes you need single photons, and also it's based on photon counting, so that's why it's called discrete variables. So there's an alternative, and the alternative is what I'm going to talk about, in continuous variable quantum key distribution, where the key information is encoded into a continuous variable into the quadratures of the quantized electromagnetic field, and where Bob performs continuous measurements, so as we learned in the previous talk, performs homodynamic measurements, so measuring the continuous variables. And of course the benefit of using a continuous variable version is, as we heard in the previous talk, that you can use these high efficiency detectors, working at room temperatures, low noise, and large bandwidth. Alright, so this is the motivation for using CVQKD. So you probably felt there's a small competition between discrete variable and continuous variable QKD, a friendly competition I would say, but actually you can also combine the technologies, I mean photon counters and homodynamic detectors, to make new quantum information protocols. And this I have tried to review in this recent, or the Nature Physics paper will be appearing soon, where we show that by combining technologies of these two worlds, you can actually do new great stuff. Okay. CVQKD, so it goes as follows. Let me just briefly explain the protocol. So you draw random numbers from a Gaussian distribution, and these random numbers are then used to displace or to encode the key information into a continuous variable, into the quadrature, so x and p quadrature, the amplitude and phase quadrature. So this is done here on coherent states. So this ends up with a Gaussian distribution of coherent states, or a Gaussian ensemble of coherent states. And this ensemble of coherent states is then sent to Bob, who performs quadrature measurement. And this quadrature measurement could be like switching homodynamic measurement, where you switch between x and p measurements, or it could be a quadrature measurement where you simultaneously try to measure x and p. And that gives you a list of numbers, and this list of numbers will be correlated to the list of numbers that we have at LSS site. Of course, there will be some noise involved because there's some intrinsic noise at the coherent states, and there will be some noise in the channel, or there might be some noise in the channel, and there is also might be some noise associated with the detection. So it's not a perfect copy of the list that the LS has. So therefore we have to do some post-processing. There are like 3 steps in the post-processing. First you have to do some parameter estimation. So you have to characterize your channel, you have to characterize your state, do tomography of your state, which will give you an upper bound on the information that an eavesdropper might get. So this is a very important part. And then there is error reconciliation. So there are different types of reconciliation strategies. There's a reverse reconciliation where Alice tries to guess what Bob is measuring, and then by using some classical error coding techniques, you can correct the data. And then at the end of the day, you do some privacy amplification using appropriate hash functions. So experimentally, it's simple. So you just take the output of a laser and you use 2 electro-optic modulators, an amplitude and a phase modulator, send it through your fiber, and then you do some some measurements, quality of measurements at the receiving station. All right, and there are different type of protocols that one can try out. So there are different variations. So namely, you can use different type of states, and in principle for continuous level QKD, you can use any type of state you like, because all electromagnetic fields, they have a phase-based representation. I mean, they have a continuous variable representation. So therefore, you can use any kind of state, but it's easiest to use Gaussian states because those are easy to produce. For example, the coherent state, but you can also use squeeze states, and you can even use thermal states to realize secure QKD. And then you can also apply different type of modulations. You can modulate it like in a two-dimensional Gaussian fashion, where you have a Gaussian modulation along the x quadrature, along the p quadrature, so you have like symmetric Gaussian distribution of coherent states. You can also use a 1D Gaussian modulation, which I'll come back to later in my talk. And you can also use a discrete modulation. You can use many different modulation patterns. I mean, discrete is quite standard in classical communication, for example, binary phase shift keying or QPSK. All right, and then the type of measurement, I already mentioned this. You can use homodyning or heterodyning, and then there are different type of post-processings. And in my talk, I'll only focus on reverse reconciliation. But you can also use a protocol of direct reconciliation as well as a protocol of post-selection. Okay, so this is just illustrating that you can also use squeeze states instead of coherent states. So now the x quadrature is squeezed, the p quadrature is unsqueezed, or you can use thermal states. All right, so let me start by the first protocol, where we make use of coherent states from a standard optical laser. And then what is normally done in the community is that you're modulating the amplitude and the phase quadrature determined by some Gaussian distribution. So you have some symmetric Gaussian distribution in phase space, which is then sent to Bob, who is performing the heterodyne measurement. However, we can ask ourselves, do we really have to encode the information into conjugate quadratures? I mean, if you consider BB84 protocol, then of course this is an absolute necessity to do. Otherwise, you won't have the initial security. You have to encode the information into conjugate basis of your qubit, and this is simply because of the fact that the state that is being used is an eigenstate of the modulation basis. This is not the case for continuous variable. This is one of the main differences between discrete variables and continuous variables. That here, the states we are using, the coherent states, are not eigenstates of the modulation basis. I mean, the coherent state is not an eigenstate of the x basis. I mean, the eigenstate of the x basis is an infinite discrete states which we cannot even produce. So therefore, you have already the necessary non-orthogonality between the different states if you only use one basis for modulation. I mean, the basic requirement of security is non-orthogonality between the different states, and you don't need to use conjugate quadratures or conjugate basis, x and p basis, to fulfill this basic requirement. So therefore, it would be interesting to look at a 1D, one-dimensional Gaussian distribution of coherent states. So instead of modulating along x and p, we only modulate along one of the quadratures. And then we want to see whether this can give rise to some secure communication. And the motivation for doing this is that we can get rid of one of the most expensive components in our setup, namely the amplitude modulator. So, I mean, the setup is already quite simple, but now we want to make it even simpler by getting rid of probably the most expensive component of the setup, the amplitude modulator. So the amplitude modulator requires interferometric stability, which makes it a little bit complicated, and also it's very costly in terms of power consumption. I mean, basically you lose half of the power when you're trying to make a pure amplitude modulation. So just getting rid of it would be nice. That's the motivation. All right, but we have to check whether it's whether the protocol is secure, and for this we have to make some basic assumptions to make the security proof simple. So first of all, we assume that we have an infinite long key, so it's in the asymptotic limit, and then we assume that the eavesdropper performs a collective attack. This is the most powerful attack that the eavesdropper can perform. And of course we also assume that the eavesdropper does not have access to Alice and Bob's station. They are trusted, the two stations. In that case, you can find the secret key rate using this simple formula here. I is of course the mutual information between Alice and Bob, and chi here is the Rolebo information. So beta is the reconciliation efficiency that we heard about already in the previous talk. All right, and we also know that for continuous variables, the optimal attack is Gaussian due to the optimality of Gaussian states, and that means that we can actually calculate an upper bound of the Rolebo information just by considering the covariance matrix of the bipartite state between Alice and Bob. So therefore it's fairly easy to calculate the security, so we're actually just using standard approaches to find the secret key rate as a function of the general loss, or the communication length of the scenario. Alright, so and here this is for two different cases. So the red one is for the single or the one-dimensional Gaussian modulation case, I mean the simplified version, and the blue one here is for the standard dual Gaussian modulation approach. And we see, of course, I don't know whether it's of course, but we see that the single quadrature modulation behaves worse than the dual modulation. However, we can still generate a key over a certain distance. Okay. So we just want to test it as a proof of principle experiment, and I also must emphasize this is just a proof of principle. We're not using telecom lasers here, so this is a 1 micron laser again. So, and then we simply split a 3 milliwatt beam into two parts. We have now just a single modulator. It's an extraordinary simple setup in which we encode the key information using a Gaussian noise distribution. Then this is then sent to Bob, who then receives the auxiliary beam as well as the signal beam. They interfere on this beam splitter, so they have balanced powers, these two beams. That makes the heterodyne measurement extraordinarily simple. So we have just 2 detectors to realize the heterodyne detection. We don't need 4 detectors, as you should usually see. Just 2 detectors, you can actually get information about conjugate quadratures X and P simultaneously because of the equal brightness of the signal power and the auxiliary beam here. So just by taking the difference and the sum of these two, you get information about X and P simultaneously. With this, you can find the covariance matrix, you can calculate the Rolebo information, and as well as you find the correlations and therefore the mutual information. And then the experimental data are those dots that you see on the curve. All right. So the bottom line is that you can actually do secure communication just by using a single phase modulator. You don't have to modulate in conjugate quadratures. Of course, I should stress that you still have to measure conjugate quadratures because you have to make a full estimation of your channel, or you have to do tomography of your state. This is still important. Okay, let me go on. So now I've been looking at the coherent state protocol and a one-dimensional Gaussian distribution. So now I want to turn to squeeze states. I mean, there are not that many groups that have been looking into squeeze states whether you can actually gain anything in terms of communication distance or secure communication distance using squeeze states. So this is this we have done. I mean, we started this some years ago. So this work here is rather old, published in 2012. So here we want to consider the uses of the two-mode squeeze state on Einstein Berlowski-Rosen state. So the protocol goes as follows. So we start with an EPR state with 2 modes, and then you perform a measurement at the delta station, and this measurement is either X or P measurement. I mean, a homodyne measurement switching between 2 different quadratures. And then what you prepare here is just a squeeze state. I mean, if you measure an X, the X quadrature here, then you prepare a squeeze state here with a mean value given by the value that you obtain in your measurement. So for example here, you prepare a squeeze state which has a mean value of x1, which is the measurement outcome of this detector. When you measure P, then you, of course, you prepare a P phase quadrature squeeze state as shown here. And this result, the outcome here will be random. So it will give rise to like a Gaussian distribution of p squeeze states and a Gaussian distribution of x squeeze states. So we end up again with a Gaussian distribution of squeeze states. So this is then sent to Bob, goes through a noisy channel, a lossy channel, and Bob performs the state measurement. And now we look at the key rate as a function of distance. So this is the key rate you have here as a function of distance. And this line here, the solid line here, is the best you can do with a coherent state protocol. And I think actually assume in this scheme here that we have 0.1 short noise unit of excess noise. So this is then the best you can do with a coherent state protocol. And beta is set to 1 here, the reconciliation efficiency. Alright, so now if you now use a 3 dB squeeze state here, so and the degree of squeezing also determines the size of your alpha bit, because if you have 3 dB of squeezing, you have 3 dB of anti-squeezing, and this will then determine the size of this Gaussian distribution of squeeze states. So for 3 dB squeeze states, I think that's 3 dB squeeze states, you will get a rate that looks like this, which is quite poor. So we don't want to do this. Nobody wants to do this. However, if you have 10 dB squeeze state, then you can go all the way out here, and then you will actually gain a lot compared to a coherent state. So you can actually improve the distance by more than 100 kilometers using 10 dB of tumor squeezing. This is not commercially available. This is of course a problem. However, so if we only have 3 dB of squeezing in our lab, which is like more standard in the laboratory, what do? I mean, the idea is then to apply a modulation here. So just we're simply extending the alpha bit by applying an extra modulation, X and a T modulation here. So that means that we're simply extending the alpha bit here, somehow combining the squeeze state protocol and the coherent state protocol. And this then means that for 3 dB squeeze states, you get up here, so you beat the coherent state protocol with about 50 kilometers. And then if you use 10 dB squeeze states and a modulation, then you also extend the length by around 25 kilometers. So this was also demonstrated in a laboratory some years ago and published in this paper. So you can look this up if you're interested in experimental details. However, so now we want to, so this is a very complicated experiment, so you need two squeezers. So we thought about, can you do it with just a single squeezer? I mean, can you just modulate it in a single quadrature? We don't want to modulate it in conjugate quadratures. So you start with the laser, you squeeze. You start with coherent state, you squeeze it, and then you have phase modulation. So you modulate it along one quadrature. And then we actually discovered something surprising, because I mean, when we calculated the Ulrik information, then we got a curve that looked like this. So here we are plotting the Ulrik information as a function of the modulation strength of this phase modulator, or the width of the distribution here. For coherent state, this is the black curve here. This is what you expect. So I mean, for no modulation, I mean, then the Ulrik information will also, of course, be 0. You will not get any information if you encode no information into the state, and then the Ulrik information will increase when you increase the modulation strength. However, if you're using a squeeze state, then it's completely different. So here you see that there is actually some information that goes into eavesdropper even with a tiny amount of modulation. However, as you increase the modulation, the Ulrik information goes to exact 0. So the Ulrik information is completely 0. I should of course mention here, I assume that the channel here is purely lossy. I mean, there's no excess noise in the channel, so it's a purely lossy channel. And then you can actually find a modulation strength for which the eavesdropper will get absolutely no information. So that means that in this rate formula here, the Ulrik information is not there any longer. And that actually means that you can generate a secret key no matter what the beta value is. No matter what is the efficiency of your reconciliation efficiency, then you can generate a secret key. So the dots here are experimental data points, so we also realized this experiment in the laboratory, also as a proof of principle experiment. So now let me try to explain a little bit hand-wavy how this is working. So you start out with a squeeze state, which you then phase modulate. And I want to describe the evolution of the quadratures through the system. So the quadratures, the amplitude quadratures, or the phase quadratures, are given by x squeeze and xa, where this is the quadrature associated with the squeeze state, and this is the quadrature associated with the phase modulation. And now we go into the channel, and this is a purely lossless channel, so it's a beam splitter channel. That means that the beam is split into two, and we simply just apply the beam splitter transformation onto this input state. And of course we shouldn't forget the vacuum input port here. So this is what goes to Bob, where SA is the transmission of the beam splitter, or the transmission of the channel, and this is what goes to Eve. Right. Alright? And now what is of relevance is the correlations between these two. I mean, are the correlations between Bob's results and Eve's results? So we can easily calculate the correlations. So we just multiply the two together and find the average. And then you'll see that this is the correlations. And you can see that this correlation here can be zero because of this minus sign here. And this minus sign here comes from the beam splitter phase relations. Okay. So that means that you have a minus sign here, and therefore if this part here, I mean the variance of the squeeze state plus the variance of the modulation is equal to the variance of the vacuum port here, the variance of the vacuum, then the correlation between Eve and Bob will be exact zero. Right? So that means, and of course, this cannot be fulfilled for coherent state. For coherent state, the variance of this part here will be equal to the variance of the vacuum state, and therefore the variance of the modulation, the encoding variance, will have to be zero. So it's only for squeeze state it works. So for squeeze state, whenever this one will be below 1, I mean it's normalized to the shot noise level, then by performing a small modulation to the beam, then the sum of these two will then be equal to the variance of the vacuum state 1. So, and therefore the correlation will be zero, whenever information is zero, and the eavesdropper is completely out of the game. Okay, so we were quite intrigued by this, so therefore we want to go for a field implementation of this, and this is done together with Lund and Christoph Marquardt from the Max Planck Institute in Erlangen, Germany. And the experiment was actually performed last week, but we haven't analyzed the data yet. So my student Christian, he was there working with one of the students, Kevin, in Erlangen, and they have this link in Erlangen of 1.6 kilometers, free space link, and then they have a squeeze station at the Max Planck site. This is the squeezer, sent through the turbulent atmosphere over 1.6 kilometers, and then and then it's the receiving station was at the science building at the university, where conjugate quadrature measurements are being performed, or heterodyne measurements. So here, this is actually Stokes parameter measurements, but this is basically the same as measuring X and P simultaneously. So we are now looking into the data. Okay, so it seems that you can actually gain something by using squeeze light for QKD. So therefore, we want to try to improve our squeeze light sources. I mean, what we're using today is not really something that you want to commercialize, because it's big and bulky. So I mean, at my university we're using these centimeter-sized technology. So these are optical chromatic oscillators. So you have a non-linear crystal, this periodically pole KTP crystal. You see parametric down conversion, that means a pair production, and then this has to be extremely efficient. So therefore, it's put inside a cavity. So it's a 4-mirror cavity, which improve the parametric down conversion process, and therefore you can produce squeezing. You can actually produce a lot of squeezing. I mean, people have produced up to 13, 14 degrees squeezing in such systems. So it works quite nice. I mean, and you produce it in a nice, clean, spatial, temporal mode. So this is of course nice, but it's very difficult to scale up because it's big and bulky, and you require a lot of locking loops around it in order to make it work. For the experiment in Erlangen, we used fibers, which are a bit simpler, but here we are making use of the K nonlinearity in silica fibers, and this nonlinearity is much slower than the nonlinearity that you see in parametric down conversion. So therefore, you need very strong pumps in order to see, in order to produce squeezing. So in this experiment, femtosecond pulses are being used. So we want to try to miniaturize this technology, and what we're now trying to do is try to make micrometer devices, so small ring cavities made of silicon nitride. So they have a footprint of around 50 microns, so they're much smaller than what we see over here. So we're using the carrier effect in silicon nitride, and the carrier effect in this material is 10 times faster than the carrier effect in silica fibers. However, it's still much slower than the nonlinearity in these systems here. So of course it has to be carefully designed. So we went through a design of the system. So here how it looks like. So we ended up with like a racetrack resonator with a diameter of roughly 60-70 micron. And it's coupled to a bus waveguide, straight waveguide as you see here. So light is being coupled in at the very end here, propagates along the waveguide, and then it's evanescently coupled into the ring. And then it oscillates in the ring many, many times and then leaves out here, and then hopefully the light is squeezed. Of course, we have to fabricate this with care, because I mean losses in the system will degrade the squeezing. So it's not like a standard photon pair generation where you don't care too much about losses because that just produces vacuum, and then you don't care. You only care when a pair of photons arrives. But here, I mean for squeeze states, we care about the vacuum because the vacuum is also measured by our homodyne detector. So therefore, we have to reduce the losses of the system. Okay. And yeah, and that's another interesting point. So we also need to be able to couple the light efficiently out of the waveguide, and this can also be quite tricky. So here at the end we have some adiabatic coupling between the waveguide here and the free space mode. And this waveguide is about 500 nanometer wide and 250 nanometer height. Okay, so we simulated this. So this is what we should expect using realistic parameters. So this is squeezing as a function of the bandwidth, and you can see it has tremendous bandwidth, 6-7 gigahertz of bandwidth. These systems, which is very different from the optical hermetic oscillators that we are using today, which have a bandwidth of only 30-40 megahertz. So here we go up to 6-7 gigahertz, and we see about 4 dB of squeezing using the detection efficiency of 80%. And using a propagation loss inside the silicon nitride of 1 dB per centimeter. And people have actually measured much lower than this. So this should be realistic numbers that we are using here, or not optimistic numbers, but numbers that should be doable. Okay, so the system was fabricated. So this is a scanning electron microscope image of one of the racetrack resonators. So this bar here is 10 micron. And we tested this in the laboratory, so we have our laser. So this is the laser at 800 nanometer. We also want to go to silicon for this experiment, but right here we are operating at 800 nanometer, and then the beam is split into two. One is directed to the state interrogation part here, and another part is used to pump our silicon nitride ring cavity. And so the coupling station is just shown here. All right, and the measurement results are shown here. So one problem with using these structures for producing squeezing is that the squeezing that you're producing is not amplitude squeezing. So it's not easy to measure with direct detection. So this is a phase space picture of the squeeze state. So the red area here is the output of our silicon nitride squeezer. So this is just the classical part, and then you have the noise ellipse, and you can see the noise ellipse is rotated with respect to the amplitude. So that means that just by measuring it directly, you won't see the squeezing. So therefore, we have to somehow be able to find a way to rotate the squeezing ellipse with respect to the amplitude direction. And this we do by interfering it with an auxiliary beam, and this is the green beam here, or the green arrow. So just simply interfering these two in an asymmetric beam splitter, which then gives rise to a new state. The resulting interfered state is the blue one here. So we see that the direction is now changed, and we also see that the magnitude, the power of the beam has also changed. But what we also see, what is most important, is that the squeezing ellipse is now rotated with respect to the direction of the amplitude. And now by changing the phase of this green displacement beam here, then you will be able to go along this line here of the resulting interfered beam, and at one point the the direction of the squeezing lips will be such that that you're producing amplitude squeezing. So just by performing a direct amplitude measurement, you should be able to see the squeezing here, and here you should be able to see the anti-squeezing. So this circle here represents the circle that could actually be detected be measured with our detector, because I mean, the beam out here is very bright. It's like 200 milliwatt. It cannot be detected by our detector. It saturates or it burns. So therefore, it's only when we're inside this inner circle here that we can actually open our detector and detect the noise. And this is what we see here. So here we detect the noise. This is the variance of the squeezing lips with relative to the variance of vacuum as a function of phase, as a function of this phase displacement here. So we see that, and then we see this oscillation here. So up here, this corresponds to measurement here, the anti-squeezing. Down here corresponds to measurement here, the squeezing. So we anti-squeezing, squeezing, anti-squeezing, and then in between we have to chop the beam, because then we are outside the circle here, and our detector will saturate. Right. So when we saw this, we got happy and unhappy. So happy because we see the structure, we see anti-squeezing, squeezing. Unhappy because it does not go below zero. It has to go below zero to see squeezing. So we see some squeezing effect, but it's not quantum squeezing yet. So these are the preliminary results, and we are working hard to really try to see squeezing from these structures. And this brings me to the end of my presentation.